Thanks for watching the Calvary Briefing. It is January 13th, 2022, and I am so thankful to be here today and wanted to bring you a challenge that came to me last month as I was reading several Christmas devotionals. For much of our lives, we look at life in a negative way. At some point in our existence, we hit a peak physically, intellectually, and then from that point on, things kind of go downhill. We tend to look at the world that way as well. We see it spinning downward. We see it becoming worse and worse until Jesus comes back and brings a new heaven and a new earth. Sometimes we fail to see good in our world and good in our present situation, good that might be right in front of us. Now, when you look at the Christian spiritual world that we live in, I have to admit that it is difficult to see a lot of good there. In our time, there are fewer people even attending church than there have been in times past. If you take a simple morality test and hand it around our nation, you'll find that morality is not as honored as it was in years past. Our culture is more opposed to Christians and to Christianity than it was in the past. Within the church, Bible literacy is falling. People do not pray as often as Christians in other generations have prayed. But there's at least one emphasis that has come in the last 20 years that I believe has been extremely helpful and positive for all of us that are alive at this point in history. And that emphasis is the emphasis on the gospel. The emphasis on the fact that the gospel is for all of life, not just for the beginning of your walk with Christ. And this emphasis is incredibly helpful, and this emphasis is essential for being a faithful follower of Jesus Christ today. The gospel, quite simply, is good news. We see the gospel plastered over the pages of the Bible, especially the New Testament. The good news is the truth that God sent His only Son to free us from being slaves to sin. God's Son, Jesus, freed us by paying our debt of sin through His death on the cross. Believing that Jesus did this for you and having faith that He is the only way to God makes it possible for you to live forever. And that quite simply is the gospel. Now that gospel draws us to God, but that gospel also keeps us with God. Just believing that good news brings you three wonderful gifts, three wonderful provisions every day that you are alive. These three gifts, again, came as I was reading through some Christmas devotionals, and I made a note that even after Christmas, these things are incredible blessings in our lives. What happens simply because you believe the gospel? What happens simply because you are a child of God? Well, one clear thing that happens in your life every day if you're simply a child of God is this: you have a clear purpose for living. You have a clear purpose for living. As you look at the letter of 1 John, you find that John writes these things. I'm writing these things to you so that you may not sin. The reason the Son of God appeared was to destroy the works of the devil. These are written in 1 John 2 and 1 John 3. Now, as you look at those verses, we see that that's, again, the gospel. Jesus came to destroy the works of the devil, the works of sin in your life. And later on, in the 3rd chapter, verse 23, John tells us clearly, and this is his commandment, that we believe in the name of his Son, Jesus Christ, and love one another, just as he commanded us. It's interesting, isn't it, that John says two things, but they are so similar that they are one command. And the thing that John tells us here is love Jesus and love others. Love Jesus, love others. Every day of your life, when you wake up, there is a purpose for you, a purpose for me. Love Jesus and love others. Just because the gospel exists and just because you've believed it means that you have a clear purpose for living every day of 2022 that God gives you. Another gift, another blessing, another thing that we have simply because the gospel is true, simply because we have believed it, is hope. Hope that our failures will be forgiven. It doesn't take long to be a human being before you realize that part of being human is failing. We fail so many times. Oftentimes, sin is at the center of those failures. We fail those that are closest to us. We fail those who love us most. The hope of the gospel is that our failures are forgiven and we can start over. Don't let your failures have the last word. What a blessing in your life that your failures are forgiven. What hope that brings. Just because you failed yesterday doesn't mean that you're going to fail today. I write this to you, John says, that you might not sin. But if you sin, you have an advocate, Jesus Christ. Another blessing of the gospel is simply that our failures can be forgiven through Jesus Christ. A third blessing that's ours every day, simply because the gospel is true, is that Christ will help us. Christ will help us. We're not alone. We know that a name for Christ is Emmanuel, which means God with us. The third implication of the truth of the gospel is that Christ is with us. He came to destroy sin. He came to free us from slavery to sin by dying on the cross. He will truly help you. He's on your side. He didn't come to destroy you. He came to save you. 1 John 4:4 says, "He who is in you is greater than he who is in the world." Jesus is alive. Jesus is almighty. Jesus lives in us by faith, and Jesus is for us, not against us. He will help you in your fight against sin today, every day. Because of the good news of the gospel, because the gospel is true, we have a clear purpose for life every day. We have hope that our failures will be overcome. We have the promise of Jesus to help us. So trust Him.